Hi, my name is Phil Metzger, and in 1992 I moved to Moscow, Russia. From there I lived in the beautiful Central European country of Hungary, where my family and I spent the next 20 years living, learning, and sharing about Jesus. Different foods, culture, and language, but underneath it all, we discovered the most amazing people. We learned that to share the gospel effectively, we had to adjust. We had to cross cultures. Now we're back in the U.S., and we're discovering that this country is a melting pot of culture. This show is committed to helping Christians connect to those who think, believe, and live differently than them. This is Crossing Cultures. Well, thank you so much for listening to this new podcast. We're here in episode 1 of Crossing Cultures, and the podcast is dedicated to helping Christians connect to those who live, believe, and think differently than they do. And I am joined by my good buddy, Nick Roach.
What's up, Philip? Thanks for having me, brother.
Dude, I'm so glad that you're here doing this with me. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, this is great.
So we're going to spend a whole bunch of weeks together talking about, in this first season, race, Christianity, culture, and race. And so the podcast, though, is, there's a broader context to the reason I wanted to do this. It wasn't even focused on race right away. But of course, 2020 has brought us a whole bunch of new things, hasn't it?
A lot of topics, yeah, for sure.
There's a lot we could be talking about. But watching the death of Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd, and we could spend 30 minutes just kind of listing names. Breonna Taylor. It brought race to the forefront once again here in America. Yeah. And I think, our context is far beyond just America. We want to see the world and see people. And so obviously the issue is American in one sense, but it's raised a lot of good conversations, heated conversations all over the world. There's groups all over the world that feel they're disenfranchised. Yeah. I'm thinking of the Roma population in much of Europe, where they feel like they don't have much of a voice. And so when we talk about race in these weeks ahead, maybe we could talk about here at the beginning of this episode or this season too. I think there's a lot of fears that people are going to have, like, oh man, I don't want to. This is just going to be one of those typical shows telling me that I'm a racist, that I'm privileged, that I'm if I'm white, I'm a loser, and if I'm black, I'm great. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think too, man. I was just thinking as you were saying that as you're hearing these things, and as even we're processing these things for the conversation, it's those places where I might feel guilt creep in about a subject. Is it my fault that these things are this way, or am I a part of this injustice that's happening? Those could be natural, I think, to a certain extent, where you feel that weight of just of the things that are going on and how you could be related to it. Right. But I think it's a good reminder to know that God does not produce guilt in us. Right. When He calls stuff to attention in our hearts, it's not for condemnation. Exactly. It is purely out of exposure for the sake of healing and exposure for the sake of sanctification, for a more spiritual word for you. Right. But it's always whatever we're feeling. I guess if we can just offer it to God for the betterment of how as He's trying to perfect our faith, as He's walking us down this transformation process of our Christian lives, that we can use it beneficial.
Exactly. I mean, you think of that when Jesus said, you're all going to deny me, or one of you is going to, and they all said, is it me? Mm-hmm. Like that kind of heart that just says, hold on, you're saying that something bad's happened or going to happen. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that it could be me? And I think there is that, and I love the words that you use there when you use the word transformation, because we're committed to a gospel perspective. In other words, the reason this is important is because we believe that God, in becoming one of us and then dying for all of us, He wants relationship with people. Mm-hmm. And we've been lost along the way. We got lost. And now there's the us and the them. Mm-hmm. Whatever the us and the them is, it exists. Yeah. And we want to have conversations that help us to bridge the gaps, not just in understanding people who live, believe, and think differently, but also for me to keep growing. Yeah, the gospel means I'm still growing as a human being. I'm still growing as a Christian.
Right, because, I was just talking to a buddy the other day, and he was kind of, I would say he was a little bit down, honestly, admitting that, hey, I feel like I'm a believer. I know that. I feel like I'm really trying to be a part of the solutions, and I'm trying to make things better. But I also read clearly in Scripture that at the end of, before Jesus comes back, it's going to get a lot worse.
Right.
And so it's like, how do you see this decline that's already been forecasted for all of human life, but still have enough energy and enough legitimate hope to activate into the things that God actually cares about on the positive side,
Right.
Being a part of change, being a part of justice and all those things. And
How did you?
I feel like
yeah.
my response in that moment was just around this idea that, when you think of the world, the problem with the world is the humans on the planet.
We're the problem.
We are the problem.
Yeah.
So God's plan, being perfect, is to address the people, the problem.
Yeah,
and
human
so
problem.
when we're thinking about, all these things that could be solved, these issues in society, no matter what they may be, if there is no focus on what God's doing with the individuals in that society, like if I can spend more time preoccupied by what God is trying to show me and make me into,
Mm-hmm.
then all the issues that are on my heart, or that maybe aren't even on my heart and should be, those things will become, they'll be addressed by overflow of my transformation.
Yep.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if I'm going to spend X amount of energy in solving the world, it needs to be a majority focused on solving me,
Right.
letting God show me what he's working on. Because there's something inside of me that he's shifting and changing and making better, that's going to be better at then serving those around.
Exactly.
It always goes hand in hand.
Because then we're not, I think that's part of the problem is like we see macro problems, we see big issues, we see big problems, and we want to have like big solutions. I think God's called most of us, unless you're prime minister, king, president, or whatever, he's called most of us to deal with this on the personal level, right?
Yeah.
Me, my neighbors, that's going to be one of the shows we're going to do. Who is my neighbor?
Yeah.
Like, who is it that God's put in my life? And I like what you're saying there, because I do know the end of the Bible. You know the end of the Bible. Things are going to get worse. And yet into that, God still loves the world. Mm-hmm. He still wants to reach people right now.
Right.
And if I think that the danger is in this mindset that is like, you know what? The world, it's all going to hell anyways, so I'm just going to focus on me and my family, my friends, my church, and throw our hands up. That's not the approach that the Bible tells us. So we do live in the dichotomy of like, on one hand, we know the end, but at the same time, Jesus says like, put your hand to the plow, be about my Father's business.
Yeah. And so honestly, man, one of the reasons I was really excited and interested to be in these conversations with you was when you said that I really want to speak to Christians that have a hard time dealing with people that are different, or have different lifestyles or believe different things, because I believe that in that personal transformation process, this is one thing that's going to inevitably come up.
Right.
We're going to be forced by the leading of God to interact with people that aren't just different, that people that upset us.
Yeah.
People that we would even probably not say out loud, but people that we hate.
Yeah.
We're going to be forced to see how we have love for them supernaturally.
Right.
And so I think that's what was so interesting for me in this process. And I've heard you say this a lot of times where, it's one thing to not agree with somebody and you don't like them or whatever, but like we don't even agree with ourselves from 10 years ago.
Exactly.
And so, just cultivating this idea that however we believe right now is not the way.
Right.
And it's not the right way, or everybody else is messed up. So we need to constantly walk with a little bit of humility.
Yeah.
And also understanding that those different beliefs, those are evolving us those are developing our experience of God as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're talking about like a cultural belief. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of Christians to understand. And I know you and I have talked a lot about this, that like we love Christians. We are Christians. We love the church. We love God's people. I think that this podcast could be difficult for some Christians. Mm-hmm. I think especially, so I'm asking you, if you're watching, if you're listening, give yourself an opportunity to be a part of this rather than just shutting down, right? Like, oh, I already know what they're going to say. I know their perspective. You don't know our perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think we're trying to come at a perspective with humility. We aren't trying to, here we are trying to talk about people that feel disenfranchised. We don't want to then disenfranchise another group of people in the process.
Exactly right.
Our goal is to bring some kind of like a understanding and a connection. And culture is an interesting thing because I can be a Christian. I've received the eternal truths of God, that God died for me and I have a new life in him and one day I'm going to go to heaven. But that doesn't necessarily mean I won't still have things that are wrong in my thinking, in my living, in my emotions. I'm still a part of the process of God's transformation, right? Like I didn't now arrive.
No, it's good, yeah. And it's key because I think that, again, referencing my buddy's story where he was kind of down about not being able to solve everything that's wrong in the world. It's exciting to think about the fact that I'm not perfect yet because that gives me something to do today. That gives me something. I know if nothing else I can control, I can submit to God today.
Yep.
I can do the next thing that I feel like he's asking me to do, or I can learn the next thing that I need to learn or grow in. So I have this living, breathing to-do list, and not in a work type of way, but just this, it's like an exciting search. It's almost like I believe it's a proverb where it talks about it's the glory of God to hide a thing, and the glory of a king to search it out. It's like that. It's that game in a way where God is like, he's got these treasures for us, hidden off in different experiences and different relationships. And it's our job to push through the discomfort and the weirdness and awkwardness and the pain. Excuse me, to reap the benefits. And that just keeps going and keeps going. And then that's when I believe we start to intersect with that verse in John when it talks about living life to the fullest. Like when Jesus is saying, like, I've come that you have life and have it abundantly. That's when you really can start to trust God with those next steps. No matter what they may be or how crazy they may sound based on your cultural background or your family history or whatever. That's when you start to really come alive because you realize you've let go of what you're trying to make your life into. And you're open to what God actually has for you. And immediately, directly, what he has for all of us through you.
Love that. And I like the word pain in there because there's pain involved.
Absolutely.
And when I realize, like, wait, maybe things aren't the way I thought they were. Or, this is the thing about, like, and I want to, maybe we could break down this idea of even just like crossing cultures as a name for a podcast, because culture is a very slippery word. It gets thrown into everything now, it's used in science, it's used in medicine, it's used in every TV show we talk about it. Anything that is like different, we use the word culture now. And I think that's a good thing. Okay, why am I having such a hard time saying it? Because you can't define culture, as just one thing. Like, here's what it is. But in a general sense, we need to remind ourselves that, like, culture is connected to the habits that we've created, the things that we've learned from our parents and their parents and their parents, our history. It's a part of our language. It's connected to our foods. It's connected to the things that we've been told are valuable and the things we've been told are not valuable. All of our, so culture is a mix of neither good or bad. It's a little bit of both good and bad. And the thing is Jesus intervened, God intervened into our cultures. So when we talk about culture, I want it to not be like it's a negative. Like we need to get out of that. No, God intervened into humanity, into human culture. But before all of this ever happened, before sin entered the world, God intervened into Adam's life when he was still in his perfection. And that tells me the value of a person is not in a culture. Can't give you value.
Yeah, that's good.
Culture it can't add value to what God already gave you. God valued humanity apart from our culture.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that that's an important thing. So when I say crossing cultures, I'm thinking of that slippery word that can't be defined of culture, but the word crossing, and it's important to me because I think a lot of times when people want to try to connect to another culture, we can do like down cultures rather than crossing. I've arrived and I'm now going to, learn your culture, even though it's primitive, even though it's below me. And I think we want to so avoid that feeling of like, or that sense of like, we've arrived and we're now lowering ourselves to reach other people. Christians are not above anyone.
Man, that makes me, I think of like value and how we have such a hard time. I think as humans, I have an issue with this too, probably from sports for so long. But, it's hard to hear that somebody else is valuable without questioning whether that means you're still valuable or not.
Right.
And so I think that there's a little bit of that when you talk about cultures where, if you're talking up the beauty of this culture and it's so, diverse and so amazing and everything, I think there is a bit of defensiveness, I think, in our imperfection where we can hear, because they're beautiful, that must mean that either I'm not or not as beautiful. And so we have to be able to elevate our perspectives to where God is able to see this is 100% valuable. This is 100% eternally valuable. And these are all things 100% eternally valuable that exist together. And that doesn't diminish.
Like when you tell one of your babies, I love you, you're not telling the rest of them you don't love them.
You're right, exactly.
But there is, in our imperfection, we can feel like, wait, am I as valuable? Am I not? And I think that's thanks for bringing that up, because I think that is a big part of the frustrations a lot of people are feeling right now. So that's why we wanted to tackle the issue of race, because, there's this move right now to say, hold on a second, something's happening here. And I'm thinking particularly in America. And are we as Christians allowed to address that from a gospel perspective without minimizing anyone else?
Yeah.
And I think we are, but I think we're having a hard time doing that.
Yeah, so I would love for you to share with me, because I don't know if I've heard the full explanation yet, and with everybody, what was your real desire in putting together this theme and then these types of conversations?
Right. Thanks for that's great, because okay, so I spent 20 years on the mission field, and I discovered when I was there that I have cultural clutter. It's not bad. It's not good, but it's clutter that people there it's not going to work to connect to them. The stories that I'd use, the approach that I would take, even just down to the very language that I was speaking. And I realized that if I was willing to get rid of those things, I might have a better chance of connecting to those people. Because the whole point is that we believe that the gospel message is over all cultural issues, right? So it doesn't matter what language you're speaking. I don't care, or if you don't speak a language. If there's no written language, it doesn't matter. God died for you. So how do I connect that message to people when I'm holding on to things that might clutter the message? So I had to learn to kind of shed those things. So coming back to America, I get back here. It's been over 20 years, and I'm realizing this is the melting pot of culture here. It's amazing. It's beautiful, and it's painful. And so I just kind of came back realizing that it's hard for Christians here to realize that we might have to be giving up some of our cultural baggage, not because it's right or wrong, if we really care about helping people know Jesus. And that's the real issue that I'm trying to deal with. It's not that I think, I look around at like the topics on race or topics, I want to talk about LGBTQ in the next season. These are not things that it's not about right or wrong. It's about, can I put that aside in order, because I don't believe that the behavioral issues that we're dealing with are the real issues. This is a heart thing, right?
That's good, yeah.
It's a heart thing. So if I could put some of the behavior to the side, even if it might matter, it doesn't matter as much as a person's eternal soul.
Yeah, that's good.
The eternity matters way more. So that's why I wanted to do this. I wanted to have, and then obviously when when everything we've been experiencing in 2020 happened, I knew right away I needed you to be a part of this. And I want to kind of flip the question, because, you've had a really your life is cool, dude. You're amazing.
I'll take it.
Yeah, man. It's super interesting. 8 years in the NFL, drafted by the Chargers.
Undrafted,
but
okay,
picked up by that's a sore point. Sorry.
Fine.
There was pain. There's pain in this process. Okay, but you started with the Chargers and then were sent over to the Bears.
Correct.
And then you spent years at the Bears.
Yeah, most of the time, 6 years in Chicago.
And my gosh. And I keep finding all the little YouTube videos and all the
Please don't.
Are you kidding? You're a beast. And then you finish your career with the Raiders. And so that's a sore point for a lot of San
Yeah.
Diegans here, right? Yeah, we're in San Diego. That's a tough. But we've talked a lot about, and I don't want to derail this, but just I think it's important. I want people to know who you are, like husband, father of 5 kids, cute
Yeah,
little
right.
kiddos,
Yeah.
and then an NFL player. Identity.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, like, why is this important to you?
Man, I think that, like I said before, this idea of Christians in general having, I don't know, some kind of like invisible friction with people that are not maybe Christians or don't have quote unquote Christian values and belief systems. I think that always has perked up in my mind because, I was raised in the Lutheran church and school system, but I didn't actually get baptized and really give my life over to Jesus until I was out of college.
Wow.
Because I'd spent so much time learning rules and memorizing Bible verses that the whole relationship side and honestly even what we needed from God was kind of lost on me. So it was just like, if you're smart enough, you can make a good life and you're good. But it wasn't until I started to get older where I realized, it's not about that. And so anyway, I go to get baptized, life is changing. And I started to read my Bible, and it wasn't the first time, but you know how when you read stuff and you're like, that was never there before.
Where did that come from? Yeah.
And so, I can kind of feel myself in between, like this super structured, Lutheran school, like mindset. But then I can also see read these stories about how Jesus actually moved when he was on earth and how he made people feel no matter who they were. So for me, this podcast is at the heart of Jesus in motion, where he's like, regardless, I guess it bothers me that people that don't have a generally Christian lifestyle, whatever, and you can define that for yourself. I'm talking popularly accepted Christian values, would never go into a Christian church.
Right.
Like that's not at all what Jesus was about.
Right.
Jesus was 100% about the people that never would ever go around religious people loved him the most.
Right.
And so I guess my heart for this podcast is to see how can we shift our beliefs to be more like God's so that we act that way.
Yep. Wow.
And it's not, again, it's there's going to be a lot more both and than there is this or that, this whole like, well, if I don't agree, then how can I blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but just look at what Jesus did. He did it somehow because we have it fully well documented.
Yep. And he didn't agree with anyone.
And
I mean, like, there's no
right.
one. He was like, oh, finally I found somebody I agree with here on earth.
Right.
He didn't agree with any of us, but he still
but somehow
bridged the gap.
Yeah, and so like that's, I guess, chasing that ideal for me is what this podcast is about. Of it shouldn't matter. I guess people should feel the most welcome around us. People should feel the most loved and the most cared for, practically and emotionally. Yep. By Christians. And the fact that it's not like that, I think, is something worth working towards.
And I think that there's this, like, I think for some Christians they would say, well, I'm just afraid that it's going to become a compromise. I'm going to compromise the gospel. And I think that to that issue, I would say, it's easy to compromise. It's very easy to, but you don't have to cross cultural lines to compromise. You can stay in your world and still compromise. So I would say that the issue of compromise has nothing to do necessarily with trying to reach people and to engage with people. It's more about like my own, like, and that's where I think we're talking about is we believe that the power of the gospel, it begins in my own life. Like God's changing me, you. And then a part of that then is that I now have God's power working in my life that allows me and enables me to cross to people who think, live, believe differently than me without me compromising at all. And I'm not defensive. I don't need to be. I don't need to be insecure. But they're changing the values of America. I hear it's like, okay, what if that happens? Did God put me here still to reach people for his kingdom? The answer is yes. No matter where they're at, no matter what they believe. But if you go down this track of thinking, you're going to end up being a Marxist or a liberal. And we just want to I want to defy the terms right now. Yeah. There are no bad people on this podcast. Right. And what I mean by that is the Bible says none are good. So when I say there's none bad, I'm saying, but there's also none good. Like this is not going to be an us, them. Right. We want to bridge gaps. Yeah. Like,
go ahead.
For
me, it just helps to like almost zoom out. Like, it's, when you see those pictures of the Earth from space.
Yeah.
You can kind of see like the whole planet. Like to zoom out and realize that God is seeing everything. All of our issues are underneath that cloud layer.
Yep.
All these things that we talk about and see on the news and hear in discussions, but like God is fully above all those things, waiting for us to look up and assume his perspective.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like we need to be outside of those conversations. We need to be relevant enough to have them.
Right.
But outside of them in such a way where we don't get swayed by the aside.
Right.
You know, it's really just...
And we don't let the current politics or the current cultural expectations define us. It's like, I got to be in the
fears,
Word.
or my comfort zone.
Or my comfort zone. All of these things. These are the things that are driving a lot of the conversations that are happening. And I think what we're hoping to do is to say, no, let's just go back to like, what does the Bible say? What is the heart of God? And then how can we express that to people? You know, I can disagree with someone, but there's a way to do that where they don't feel disrespected or demeaned or belittled in any way. Yeah. You know, like I said, like, you know, as you were saying, like I've said this so many times, like I don't even agree with myself from a lot of times. Probably not even, you know, there's going to be things 10 years from now I'm going to be like, oh, I'm glad I kept growing. Yeah. But isn't that growth? Growth is that I don't stay static and just stuck to the same things that are not biblical. Right. What is biblical? What is the gospel? Man, I hope I stay to those things for the rest of my life.
This is just like that growth idea, man. I've had this thought a lot because, like you said, we've had babies at a pretty good rate here the last couple of years. And so, but you know, with young kids, there's a lot of doctor's appointments, and it seems like, especially the first few months, they're constantly like weighing and measuring them. And at first I was just like, every single time you have to like measure their head. And I think at one point my wife, Anna Marie, she asked and she goes, you know, like, what are you guys looking for? She's like, well, you know, if they're not growing at a certain rate based on their age, then we know that could be a sign of some issues. And I remember it just kind of hit me like, man, if our Christian life is about a progression and not a race to get saved or any of these things we're talking about, after you have accepted Jesus, we are signing up for a life of changing. Yeah. If I can see in areas of my life that have gone stagnant for a long time, and it's especially if it's causing friction in how I'm interacting and people experiencing the love of God through my life, that could be a sign of something that's not right. It's just the same as you track the growth of a baby's head and their weight to make sure that they are staying healthy. I don't think it's a lot different for us.
No, I don't think so at all. But it's that we're the ones that have to be willing to track that growth. Like, have I become static? Have I become complacent? Am I being directed by my fears? Am I being directed by somebody else's agenda that may not necessarily be God's? These are questions that we need to be asking ourselves all the time. And I have to make the decision, and I think that that's what we're doing as a part of this podcast, and I'm kind of challenging every listener, is that we're asking you, if you're a believer, if you put your faith in Jesus, what is it that really matters to you? We're deciding, you and I are deciding that what matters to us is that people would know God. And so we're willing to work through their own pains, their own fears, their own hurts, their own deficits in order to help them to know who Jesus is. Because we believe that once a person grabs hold of when God grabs hold of their life, all these other things that are important get worked on, get resolved, get healed. There's wholeness that happens. You know, the issue of like race, we're not going to solve this one. Right. And I would even say like, you know, and I want you to speak to this as kind of in our closing here. You know, I mentioned the Imago Dei earlier, that like, and that means the image of God, that God sees value in us before there were any of our like cultural issues. But quite often those even those terms are they're all been defined by white European theologians. You know, this is the image of God. Why don't you speak to that as a black man? You grew up in Wisconsin, right?
Yep.
Very different background than I've had. Yeah. And yet, you know, so how do you see the Imago Dei, the image of God?
Man, I think as it relates, especially to this race conversation, I see it in two ways. I see one thing is that God created us in his image, and we're told that before we even know what his physical image is. Yeah. You know, so I think of like all these, you know, these issues going on with the way that people look on the exterior is just so out of focus.
Yeah.
You know, from when we're talking about the image of God. The image of God is characteristics, its attributes, it's everything interior about us as humans, by the way, not just Christians. And I think so it's just the idea that we see these images and that's what's triggering all these negative interactions, I think is obviously a red flag. Also, I think it's key to highlight, which I didn't really ever pay much attention to before thinking about this conversation, was that God is a community. The image of God is three persons.
Right.
You know, so if we think like we can assume the value for ourselves, like I am made in the image of God, and that makes me feel, you know, accepted, wanted, loved. But I also have to understand that I am incomplete individually.
Right.
Because God is not just God the Father. God is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all one at the same time.
Yep.
Completely different, though. Different functions, different styles, personalities. But existing perfectly in community is a major element of the image of God. And that's, I think, the part that is being highlighted in this specific discussion is once we're okay accepting our value personally, being accepting the image of God, we have to see that, oh shoot, you know, if I'm not longing for that type of connection, that complementary in terms of completion, that complementary type of connection with other people, whether they are believers or not, or whether they think like me or not, then I'm still missing out on an element of living into my image of God.
Yeah.
Because I'm without the other.
Right.
You know?
Wow. That's really, really good.
So.
Dang, dude.
Nothing major.
Dropping some truth right there. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're at our time. 30 minutes, man.
Went fast.
It went fast. Hopefully for our listeners, it went fast. Hopefully they're not like, this was really painful and long.
No, this is good, man. Thanks for putting this together.
Hey, thanks for being a part of it. And I mean, we got some great stuff we're going to be talking about, right? We're walking through a few of them. Who is my neighbor? Oh, I can't wait. That's one of your mentors is going to be with us on a Zoom call. Fantastic. We're going to talk about, we're going to hit on, this is going to be privilege. That's painful.
Do I have to go to that one?
Yeah, no, yes, you do. I'm not doing it by myself. You know, we're going to talk about like terms that are being used today, like color blindness. What does that mean? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? Right. Trying to understand and like, you know, we're going to say it a few times throughout the season, but like, I don't represent all white people. You don't represent all black people. We're just two guys, both love God, and we want to help people to learn how to connect to those who live, believe, and think differently. We're going to sit down with some, I'm going to sit down with a couple of our pastors who serve, black pastors serving in a white movement. And what's that like? And oh man, fascinating stuff. So
that's cool.
I'm really thankful that you would do this. I'm thankful that we get to do this.
Yeah.
And we are hopeful that you are going to stick with us every week. So every week we're going to be putting on a new one for this season. And make sure that you are, if you haven't already followed us on Instagram at Crossing Cultures, you can do so. Don't forget also to, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow me on Twitter. Nick is all over social media. That's a joke. Nick's barely on social media.
What is that again?
What is social media?
The movie one?
Yeah. Was that a movie? Yeah. So make sure you are tracking with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put comments in the Instagram or in the gram or on YouTube or on my Twitter. We want to engage in conversations, not just be definitive in our, this is the way it is, but let's talk about it. Let's converse. We're not afraid to do that. We believe that that's the whole point of this podcast. So thanks for being with us, and we look forward to being with you next week.